My grandfather's suitcase and the truth about two families. Old Mr. Hanson stood at my front porch, holding a worn brown suitcase in his hands. His 75-year-old fingers trembled as he handed me the heavy leather case. He explained that the suitcase belonged to my grandfather Patrick, who had died 30 years ago. Grandpa had asked him to give the suitcase to me, but only after Grandma Elizabeth's death. Grandma passed away last year, and Mr. Hanson decided the time had come. I didn't understand why Grandpa would hide anything from us. Our family didn't have any particular secrets. Grandpa worked at Boeing. Grandma kept house. They raised two sons. Just a regular American family from the 1950s-60s. Mr. Hanson declined my invitation for coffee and quickly left, leaving me alone with the mysterious inheritance. All day I postponed opening the suitcase. I busied myself with regular chores: laundry, cleaning, paying bills. The suitcase sat in the hallway, seemingly watching me, waiting. Only in the evening, when all my tasks were done and I had no more excuses, did I finally place it on the kitchen table. The locks opened stiffly. The leather cracked with age. Inside, it smelled of old papers and something unfamiliar, maybe Irish soap or perfume. The first thing I saw made me freeze. A photograph of a young, red-haired woman with two children. A boy about 10 and a younger girl stood next to the woman against a backdrop of green hills. On the back, in beautiful handwriting, was written, "Molly, Sean, and Caitlin. Summer 1975, Cork." Under the photograph lay a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. All letters were addressed to Patrick Sullivan, Boeing Company, Portland, Oregon, and sent from Cork, Ireland. The dates on the envelopes spanned from 1962 to 1993, more than 30 years of correspondence. I unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was neat and feminine, the ink slightly faded. "Dear Patrick, the children ask when you'll come again. Sean just turned 5. He wants to show you how he learned to read. Caitlin goes to kindergarten and tells everyone her daddy lives in America and builds airplanes. I explain as best I can, but it's hard for them to understand why daddy can't live with us." The letter was signed, "With love, Molly." My hands started shaking. Who was Molly? And why were children calling my grandfather Daddy? Grandpa was married to Grandma. They had two sons, my father Robert and Uncle Michael. There were no other children in the family. The next letters told a story that turned everything I knew about Grandpa upside down. Molly wrote about the children's daily life, their success in school, illnesses, holidays. She wrote like a woman raising children practically alone, only occasionally seeing their father. Sean fell off his bike and broke his arm. The doctor said it will heal well, but the boy kept asking where his daddy was. I didn't know what to answer. You can't just leave your job and family in America, but your son needs a father. In another letter, Caitlin won first place in the school drawing contest. She drew an airplane and signed it, "For Daddy in America." The teacher asked why your daughter gets calls from the States so rarely. I said, "You have very important work." Each letter revealed new details of a life I never suspected existed. Grandpa wasn't just corresponding with some woman in Ireland. He had a second family there. But the most shocking thing was the tone of the letters. In the early ones, written in the early 1960s, Molly sounded in love and hopeful. She believed Grandpa's promises that someday he would move to them or bring them to America. Patrick, I understand that your work at Boeing is very important, and you can't just leave it. But maybe in a few years, you'll find a way. The children so want to live with Daddy every day like normal families. However, over the years, the tone changed. By the mid-1970s, notes of disappointment and fatigue appeared in Molly's letters. Sean is 13 now. He started asking difficult questions. He asks why other fathers live at home, but his daddy only comes for a few weeks a year. I don't know what to tell him anymore. You said you loved us, but your American family is obviously more important. By the late 1970s, the letters became shorter and drier. Molly stopped asking about moving and mainly wrote about practical things: school expenses, house problems, the children's health. Caitlin got into university. The scholarship isn't enough for full tuition. If you can help with money, I'd be grateful. If not, we'll figure it out ourselves, as always. I realized I was witnessing a love story that slowly faded under the weight of an impossible situation. Grandpa had promised Molly more than he could give, and she gradually realized she would never become his main family. The suitcase contained not only letters from Molly, but also drafts of Grandpa's replies. From them you could trace how he tried to explain his situation. "Dear Molly, I understand that it's difficult for you, but you knew from the beginning that I have a wife and children in America. I can't just abandon them. Elizabeth hasn't done anything wrong to me. We've been married 20 years. Robert and Michael are my children too." In another draft, "I can't split myself in half, though I wish I could. Every time I fly away from you, my heart breaks. But every time I think about staying, I remember my obligations in Portland." Grandpa was clearly tormented, torn between two families, but couldn't find a solution that would satisfy everyone. Among the documents were bank statements showing regular money transfers to Ireland. The amounts varied from $200 to $500 per month. Significant money for those times, but not so much that our family lived in poverty. Grandpa didn't work himself to death at 3 jobs, like in novels. He earned enough to support both families at a middle-class level. We lived normally, not rich, but not poor either. The Irish family lived the same way, judging by Molly's letters. But the most painful discovery was the photographs. Dozens of pictures of Grandpa with the Irish children. Grandpa teaching Sean to fish. Grandpa reading a book to Caitlin. Family dinner around a round table. Walks through Irish meadows. In these photographs, Grandpa looked happy, relaxed, the way I almost never remembered him in childhood. In our family, Grandpa was always serious, somewhat distant. He worked a lot, spoke little, smiled rarely. I thought that was just his character. Turns out, he was just carrying the burden of a secret that didn't let him fully relax at home. Among the papers, I found a letter from Grandpa, written shortly before his death. It was addressed to my American family. "My dear ones, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Jim decided it's time to tell the truth. I have other children in Ireland, Sean and Caitlin. I also helped Colm for many years, Molly's son from her first marriage. I met Molly in 1961, when Boeing sent me on a business trip to Europe. We fell in love, but I couldn't leave Elizabeth and you. I made a decision that was perhaps wrong, but I didn't know another way out. I'm not proud of hiding the truth, but I don't regret having children in Ireland. Sean became a good mechanic, Caitlin a teacher. Colm worked at the post office for 30 years. If you want to find them, they live in Cork. Address, 15 Maple Street. Don't judge me too harshly. I did everything I could. The letter ended with an address and phone number in Ireland. I spent a sleepless night rereading documents and looking at photographs. By morning, a picture of Grandpa's 30-year double life had formed in my head. In 1961, during a business trip to Europe, Grandpa met Molly O'Brien, a young widow with a 3-year-old son. They fell in love, but Grandpa couldn't abandon his American family. Instead of choosing, he decided to live in 2 homes. Every year or two, he went to Ireland for a few weeks, supported Molly with money, raised her children as his own. But America remained his main home. Molly knew about the American wife and children from the very beginning. Grandpa didn't lie to her about it. On the contrary, he honestly explained the situation. Molly agreed to such a relationship, hoping that over time, Grandpa would choose her. But years passed, and it became clear that Grandpa wasn't going to destroy his American family. Molly understood this and gradually accepted it. She didn't demand the impossible from him, didn't make scenes, didn't threaten to tell the American wife everything. Grandma Elizabeth also sensed that something wasn't right in her husband's life. Grandpa became distant after his first trip to Europe in 1961. Sometimes he said unfamiliar names in his sleep. He received letters that he hid. He started economizing on himself, though his salary allowed them to live better. But Grandma didn't conduct interrogations or hire detectives. She suspected the existence of another woman, but preferred to remain silent. She understood that her husband wouldn't leave her. He came home every evening, took care of the children, fulfilled his family duties. Whatever was happening in his life, it didn't threaten their marriage. The wisdom of both women amazed me more than the fact of Grandpa's double life itself. Both Molly and Grandma could have made a scene, demanded explanations, issued ultimatums. Instead, they chose to preserve what they had, without destroying the children's lives. A week later, I gathered the courage and called the Irish number. A middle-aged man with a soft Irish accent answered. When I introduced myself as Patrick Sullivan's granddaughter from America, there was a long pause. The man turned out to be Sean, Grandpa's son. He was 62 years old, worked as an auto mechanic in Cork, and lived in the same house where he grew up. Sean wasn't surprised by my call. He had always known that his father had an American family, but he admitted he had never tried to find us. He figured if his father didn't want to introduce the families during his lifetime, there were reasons for it. He didn't want to interfere in strangers' lives or destroy the fact that we didn't know the truth. We talked for 2 hours. Sean told me about his childhood, when his father came once a year or 2 for a few weeks. Those were the happiest days of the year. Grandpa played with the children, taught them fishing and crafts, told stories, but most of the time, the children grew up without a father. Molly explained to them that Daddy worked in America and couldn't come more often. The children understood that their family wasn't like others, but got used to it. Worst of all was that they couldn't talk about their father at school or to neighbors. Molly asked them not to say that Daddy was alive and working in America. Officially, she was considered a single mother, and it was easier that way. Sean admitted that as a child, he was angry at his father. He didn't understand why he couldn't stay with them like other dads. Only as an adult did he understand the complexity of the situation. Caitlin, his sister, moved to Dublin after university, worked as a teacher, and had her own family. She also knew about the American relatives and wanted to meet them. Colm, the oldest of the children, worked at the post office. Grandpa supported him equally with his biological children. though he never officially adopted him. Through Sean, I contacted Caitlin and Calm. Each conversation revealed new details of Grandpa's life in Ireland. Caitlin told me that Grandpa tried to come for important events, birthdays, graduations, holidays. It didn't always work out, but he tried. He brought gifts from America, told about his work at Boeing, taught the children English with an American pronunciation. Calm remembered how Grandpa helped him find work after school. He wrote a recommendation letter using his connections in the aviation industry. Later, he helped him get a job at the post office, where Calm worked for 30 years until retirement. But all three admitted that as children, they felt deprived. They saw that other children's fathers lived at home, participated in their lives every day. They only saw their father a few weeks a year. Molly died in 1995, a year after Grandpa. Before her death, she told the children the truth about the American family, that their father had a wife, children and grandchildren there, that he never intended to leave them for the Irish family. The children weren't angry at the American relatives. They understood that they weren't to blame for anything. On the contrary, they were interested in learning about their half-brothers and meeting them. My father, Robert, took the discovery of his father's secret hard. As a child, he considered Grandpa a model of decency and responsibility. Learning about the double life, he felt deceived. But gradually, Dad understood that Grandpa really was responsible. He didn't abandon either family, provided for all the children, cared for everyone. Life just turned out to be more complicated than people usually think. Uncle Michael took the news more calmly. He had always suspected that his father had some secrets. Strange departures, secretiveness in affairs, distance at home. It all finally had an explanation. 6 months later, we organized a meeting of the two families. Dad, Uncle Michael, and I went to Ireland to meet our half-brothers. The meeting went without particular sentimentality. We weren't close relatives, but practically strangers connected only by a common father. But everyone treated each other with respect and interest. Sean showed us the house where Grandpa lived during his visits, a small cottage on the outskirts of Cork, where his things still stand. Caitlin brought photographs and letters that Grandpa wrote to them from America. We spent a week together, getting to know each other and collecting our common family history. Both families understood that Grandpa loved all his children, but differently. He gave American children stability and presence, Irish children romance and adventure. No one blamed Grandpa for selfishness or irresponsibility. Yes, his decisions caused pain to both families, but he didn't abandon anyone, didn't shift responsibility to others, didn't lie about his intentions. The wisest in this story turned out to be the women, Grandma Elizabeth and Molly. Both could have made a scene, demanded divorce, forbidden seeing the children. Instead, they chose to preserve the good that was in their relationships with Grandpa. Elizabeth got a stable marriage, a reliable husband and father for her children. Molly got love, support, and a father for her children, even if not every day. Both women understood that life isn't perfect and chose the best of what was possible. Now, 3 years after discovering the suitcase, we maintain normal family relationships with the Irish family. We correspond by email, exchange photographs, sometimes call on holidays. This isn't a super tight super family from movies, just distant relatives who know about each other and wish each other well. Our children are friends on social media, planning to visit each other someday. Caitlin remarried and moved to Dublin. Sean still lives in his father's house and works as a mechanic. Colm retired and took up gardening. Ordinary lives of ordinary people. My father no longer considers his father a hero, but he doesn't consider him a villain either. Just a man who got into a difficult situation and solved it his own way. Not the best way, but not the worst either. Uncle Michael jokes that now he understands where his love of travel comes from. Hereditary, apparently. I sometimes think about how our life would have turned out if Grandpa had made a different choice. If he had stayed in America and never met Molly. Or if he had left his American family and moved to Ireland. Probably someone would have suffered more. Grandpa chose to cause everyone a little pain instead of fatally wounding one person. But the story didn't end there. A year after meeting the Irish family, I decided to study Grandpa's past more deeply. The suitcase still contained documents I hadn't examined in detail. Old certificates, receipts, notebooks. In one of the notebooks, I discovered Grandpa's detailed records of expenses for both families. He kept precise track of every dollar, how much he spent on the American house, how much he sent to Ireland, how much he left for himself for trips. The records showed that Grandpa lived extremely economically. He bought clothes once every few years, drove an old car, refused entertainment. All extra money went either to the American family or the Irish one. The gift records were especially striking. Grandpa planned each gift months ahead, saved money for them a few dollars a week. By Christmas, he had a list of gifts for all children with exact prices and stores where to buy them. From a December 1975 entry, Robert, airplane model set, $12.50, Woolworth store. Michael, book about cars, $8.75, bookstore. Sean, fishing rod, $15, sporting goods store in Cork. Caitlin, painting supplies, $10, order delivery to Ireland. Grandpa remembered each child's interests, tried to choose gifts that would truly please them. He spent roughly equally on Irish and American children, though Irish gifts cost more due to shipping. Among the documents, I found medical certificates that explained a lot about Grandpa's behavior. Since 1965, he had suffered from stomach ulcers. The doctor directly linked the illness to stress and recommended avoiding emotional overload. But Grandpa couldn't avoid stress. He lived in constant tension between two families. By the 1970s, heart problems were added to the ulcer. The doctor warned about the risk of heart attack and advised changing to a less responsible job. Grandpa didn't follow the advice. Moreover, in 1972, he took on additional workload at Boeing to earn more. Sean told me that around this time, his father started coming to Ireland less often, instead of every year, once every year and a half or two. The reason became clear from medical documents. The doctor had forbidden Grandpa long flights because of his heart. Each trip to Ireland became a risk to his life. Grandpa's 1978 diary has an entry. Doctor said the next flight could be the last. But how can I not see Caitlin at graduation? She's waiting so much for Daddy to come. Grandpa came to Caitlin's graduation, but upon returning, was hospitalized with a heart attack. No one in the family knew about this. He asked the doctors not to call anyone, said he had the flu. Studying the documents, I realized that for the last 15 years of his life, Grandpa literally risked his health for trips to the Irish family. Each visit could have been fatal for him, but he continued to go. At the same time, he didn't tell either family about his health problems. He didn't want anyone to make decisions for him, or feel guilty. Molly wrote in one of her 1980 letters, "Patrick, you look tired lately. Maybe you should come less often. We understand that work takes a lot of energy." But Grandpa replied that everything was fine, just age taking its toll. He didn't want Molly to feel guilty about his illnesses. The American family also noticed changes. Grandma told Mom that Grandpa had become absent-minded, often held his chest, took some pills. But when asked, he answered that it was just fatigue from work. Only Mr. Hansen knew the truth. The suitcase contained letters Grandpa wrote to him before each trip to Ireland. These were essentially farewell letters. "Jim, if something happens to me on this trip, you know what to do. You have all the documents. Make sure Molly gets the insurance. And explain to my family someday, when they're ready." Mr. Hansen told me that he tried to persuade Grandpa not to go to Ireland several times, especially in 1985, when Grandpa literally turned green from heart pain right at the airport. But Grandpa was stubborn. He said Sean was getting married and wanted his father at the wedding, or that Caitlin was getting married, or that Calm had a baby and Grandpa wanted to see his grandchild. Each trip was justified by an important family event. Grandpa couldn't miss key moments in the Irish children's lives, even risking his own life. The last trip to Ireland took place in summer 1993. Grandpa went to his grandson, Sean's christening. He returned barely alive, spent 3 days of his 2-week visit in an Irish hospital. The Irish doctor wrote a detailed conclusion for American colleagues. He recommended complete rest, no travel, constant observation by a cardiologist. Grandpa hid this conclusion from his family. Molly understood. She was seeing Patrick for the last time. In her final letter, written a month after his departure, she wrote, "My dear, I know you won't come anymore. Your heart won't survive it. Don't feel guilty. You gave us more than we could expect. The children have grown up. They're on their feet. We'll manage. Take care of yourself for your American family." Grandpa died a month and a half after receiving this letter. The doctor said it was amazing how he lived to 64 with such a heart. Studying the medical documents, I realized that Grandpa literally burned his life for 2 families. He could have lived much longer if he had chosen one family or at least stopped flying to Ireland in his later years. But he preferred to die early rather than leave any of his children without a father at important events in their lives. This information changed my attitude toward Grandpa. Before, I thought he simply couldn't choose between families. Now I understood. He had made a choice. He chose to give his life for the right to be a father to all his children. When I told Sean about this, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said he now understood why his father looked so exhausted during visits in recent years. They thought he was tired for work and flights. They didn't know he was literally dying. Caitlin cried when she learned the truth. She admitted she had always been a little angry at her father for rare visits. Now she understood. Each of his visits was heroic. Colm said he regretted his 1985 wedding. If he had known about his father's health condition, he wouldn't have insisted on his presence. But Grandpa hid the truth so no one would feel guilty. The American part of the family also looked at Grandpa differently. Dad remembered how Grandpa sometimes grabbed his chest but said it was indigestion. How he took pills but claimed they were vitamins. Uncle Michael admitted that in recent years, Grandpa had become very sentimental. He often hugged the children for no reason, said how proud he was of them, asked forgiveness for not spending enough time with the family. Then it seemed like just age-related changes. Now it became clear. Grandpa was saying goodbye. He understood there wasn't much time left and wanted to say the most important words. In the last months of his life, Grandpa wrote separate letters to each child, American and Irish. These letters were also in the suitcase. Letter to my father. Robert, you became a good man and father. I'm proud of you. Forgive me for not always being there when you needed me. I had obligations I couldn't talk about. But you were always my priority. Take care of Mom and the children. Letter to Sean. Son, you learned to be a man without your father's constant presence. That speaks to your strength. I would have liked to be with you every day, but I couldn't. I have other children in America who also needed me. Don't be angry at them. They're not to blame for anything. In each letter, Grandpa explained his situation, apologized for the pain caused, but didn't make excuses. He took responsibility for his decisions. The shortest letter was addressed to Grandma. Elizabeth, you were the best wife one could imagine. You never asked unnecessary questions, didn't make scenes, didn't demand explanations. Your wisdom saved our family. I love you. Letter to Molly. Dear, you gave me more happiness than I deserved. I know it was hard raising children alone. I know you deserved a better man who would be there every day. But I don't regret our years. Thank you for letting me be a father to Sean and Caitlin. Mr. Hansen delivered the letters only after Grandma's death, as Grandpa requested. He said he didn't want to cause her pain with final confirmation of what she suspected. But when Grandma was dying, she herself brought up Grandpa's secret. She confessed to her daughters that she had always known about the other woman, but stayed silent for the children's sake. She said she didn't regret her choice. Grandpa was a good husband and father, despite everything. Learning these details, I finally understood the scale of the drama that played out in our family for 30 years. Grandpa, Grandma, and Molly, all three knew the truth. All suffered silently, but no one wanted to destroy the established order. Each protected the others from unnecessary pain. Grandpa didn't talk about his illnesses. Grandma didn't demand explanations. Molly didn't make scenes. Everyone sacrificed themselves to preserve their families. Such mature behavior from people who were then 40 to 50 years old amazed me. Nowadays, any family conflict ends in divorce or scandal on social media. But they chose to be silent and endure so the children could grow up in stability. And they succeeded. All of Grandpa's children became good people despite the complicated family situation. Now, 4 years after discovering the suitcase, I regularly communicate with the Irish relatives. We haven't become a super close family, but we maintain warm relations. Sean still lives in his father's house in Cork. He works at an auto repair shop, raises grandchildren. We correspond once a month, exchange photos of family events. Caitlin moved closer to her children in Dublin. She's an elementary school teacher who loves her work very much. Sometimes she tells her students the story of a grandfather who lived in 2 countries. Colm retired and took up gardening. He grows vegetables and flowers, participates in local shows. He sends us photos of his garden and seeds of rare Irish plants. We meet about once a year. Either they come to us or we go to them. Normal family relationships without excessive sentimentality. The children and grandchildren are friends online, planning joint trips around Europe. For them, Grandpa's story is just an interesting family fact, nothing more. Grandpa's suitcase still stands in my living room. Now it contains letters from Irish relatives, photos of our meetings, and a complete genealogy of the united family. But the main thing the suitcase gave me was understanding how complex human life is, how little we know about those close to us, and how important it is not to judge others until you know the whole truth. Grandpa wasn't a hero and wasn't a villain. He was an ordinary man who got into an extraordinary situation and solved it as best he could. Perhaps not perfectly, but honestly with himself. Grandpa's story taught me to value those women, Grandma and Molly, who showed real wisdom. They could have destroyed everything out of pride or jealousy. Instead, they chose to preserve the good they had. Maybe that's what real love is. Not demanding to be the only one, but wanting happiness for the person you love, even if that happiness isn't only with you. Before his death, Mr. Hansen told me, "Your grandfather didn't live one life, but three, his own and the lives of two families. That's very hard for one person." He was probably right. Grandpa took on more than one person can bear, but he saw it through to the end. Didn't abandon anyone halfway. That's enough to remember him with respect, even if we don't agree with everything.